I'm 69, and I never thought I'd be sitting in an empty house listening to the ticking clock and remembering how everything went wrong. My name is Russell Parkhurst. I've worked all my life as a building inspector in our South Haven, a town small enough that everyone knows each other, but big enough to maintain some anonymity. Doreen left 3 weeks ago. 50 years of marriage ended in a hospice room that smelled of antiseptic and the wilting flowers I brought in every day. 50 years is half a century, as she always said with a slight smile. Can you imagine, Russ, we've been together for half a century? And her eyes, blue as the summer sky over South Haven, shone with the same light they did on our wedding day. I sit in her chair, old, shabby, with embroidered cushions. She liked to embroider when her hands were still good. The house is so quiet I can hear the floorboards creak with the slightest movement. The house we bought when Roland was 5. Our son. The thought of him brings a bitterness that spreads in my mouth like an unpleasant medicine. When he was born, I thought our life would be like those family movies where everyone gathers over Sunday dinner, sharing news, laughing. I imagined teaching him how to fish on the lake outside of town, how we'd fix the car together in the garage, how he'd come home from college on vacation with a pile of dirty laundry and stories about college life. But the reality turned out to be different. Roland grew up withdrawn and aloof. As a teenager, he would sit in his room for hours on end, and when I tried to talk to him, he would respond with one-word answers, as if I were distracting him from something incredibly important. Doreen would say, "Give him time, Russ. All boys go through this." But as time went on, the gulf between us only grew wider. After high school, he went off to college in another state. He didn't visit much, he didn't call much, and then Caroline showed up. I remember the day he brought her over to meet her. A tall woman with dark hair and an appraising gaze. She looked around our house like she was estimating its value. Over dinner, she talked mostly about herself, her job at the insurance company, her future plans, what kind of house they wanted to buy. "You have a wonderful son," she said, putting her hand on Roland's shoulder. "He told me so much about you. I knew it was a lie." Roland couldn't talk about us much because he knew almost nothing about us. He didn't know that Doreen had started pottery, and her work was on display at the local gallery. He didn't know that I had retired and was now consulting for private construction firms. Didn't know his mother had blood pressure problems and I'd had minor knee surgery. They got married a year later. The wedding was lavish with 200 guests, most of whom were Caroline's friends and colleagues. Doreen and I sat at the head table, feeling like strangers at our own son's party. "They're young. They have their own lives," Doreen whispered to me, as I grumbled about the fact that Roland had only come up to us twice all evening to say hello and goodbye. 2 years later, Addison, our only grandson, was born. I thought having a baby would change things, bring us closer together. Doreen and I arrived at the hospital with a huge bouquet and a soft teddy bear the size of the baby himself. Caroline was lying in a private room that looked like an expensive hotel room. Roland sat beside her holding the newborn's bundle. "Here come the great-grandfathers," Caroline said with a smile that didn't affect her eyes. "Grandparents," Doreen corrected her gently. "Well, yes, of course," Caroline adjusted the blanket. "It's just that you look—" She didn't finish the sentence, but the meaning was clear. We looked old, too old to be grandparents. For the first few years, we tried to be involved in our grandson's life. Doreen knitted him sweaters and hats. I made wooden toys. We came for Christmas and birthdays, brought gifts, and tried to play with the baby. But gradually, our visits became more and more strained. "We're very busy right now," Roland said on the phone. "Maybe next month?" Next month never came. When Addison turned 5, we came to his birthday party with a bicycle, a real shiny one, with a basket and a bell. I had assembled it myself, spending several days searching for the perfect model. "Oh," Caroline said, looking at the bike. "It's very nice, but we already bought him an electric mini-quad. You know, all the kids at his daycare have those. That day, I saw something go out of Doreen's eyes. She was still smiling, still talking about how happy she was to see her grandson, but her hands holding the teacup were trembling slightly. The years passed. Addison grew up looking more and more like his mother, with the same appraising gaze, the same cold politeness. Our calls got shorter and shorter, our visits less and less frequent. "They're busy with their lives, Russ," Doreen said when I grumbled about Roland not returning 3 of my calls in a row. "They have work, Eddie's school, their own worries." But I could see the pain in her eyes, saw her furtively wipe away tears when she thought I wasn't looking. I saw her sit for hours over photo albums, stroking pictures of little Roland with her fingers. And then Doreen started forgetting things. First little things, where she left her glasses, what day of the week it was. Then the more serious ones. She could go to the store and forget what she'd come for. She could put the kettle on and forget about it until the water had boiled off. One day she went for a walk and couldn't find her way home. She was brought home by a neighbor who found her sitting on a park bench, confused and frightened. The diagnosis sounded like a verdict: early-stage Alzheimer's. "We can slow down the process," the doctor said, looking at us over his glasses. "There are drugs, therapy. But you have to realize that this is a progressive disease." I called Roland that same evening. He listened to the news in silence, then said, "Sorry, Dad, hang in there. I'll be there as soon as I can make time." He didn't come a week later or a month later. When I called again, he said they were going through a rough patch. Caroline had gotten a promotion. Addison had important exams at school. "We'll definitely come for Thanksgiving," he promised. They didn't come for Thanksgiving. Roland called in the morning to say that Addison had caught a cold and they had decided to stay home. "We don't want to take any chances," he said. "Mom's vulnerable to infections right now, right?" I didn't go on to say that Alzheimer's doesn't make a person more susceptible to colds. I didn't mention that Doreen had been preparing all week for their visit, despite her illness baking the pies Roland had always loved, pulling out old board games for Addison. I didn't tell her I'd seen her cry when she heard the news. Instead, I said, "Of course, son. We understand. Feel better out there." That night, I couldn't sleep for a long time. Lying next to Doreen, listening to her breathing, I thought about how we'd gotten to this point. Where had I gone wrong as a father? What had I done wrong that my own son had become such a stranger? Or was it not me, but a world that had changed, become colder and more indifferent? The next day, I saw the pictures on social media. Caroline had posted pictures of their family, Thanksgiving a smiling Roland, a healthy Addison, turkey and champagne. The caption read, "A cozy holiday with the closest of family." I didn't show those pictures to Doreen. Why cause her more pain? From that day on, the disease progressed faster. Doreen increasingly didn't recognize our house, confused me with her father, forgot how to use the phone or the microwave. Good days alternated with bad days, but the bad days were getting worse. I hired a caregiver who came 3 times a week so I could go out to the store or just take a walk to collect my thoughts. But the main care fell on my shoulders. I learned how to change bed linens with one hand, holding Doreen with the other so she wouldn't fall over. Learned to make soups and mashed potatoes that she could still eat. Learned to be patient when she asked the same question dozens of times a day. Roland called once a month. The conversations were short and perfunctory. He never asked about the details of my mother's illness, never inquired about how I was coping. He always found reasons not to come. When Doreen became very ill, the doctor suggested she be transferred to a hospice. "The professionals will take care of her there," he said, "and you could get some rest." I resisted the idea for 2 weeks. I felt it was a betrayal to put her in the wrong hands. But one night she got out of bed while I was sleeping and tried to leave the house in her nightgown. I woke up to the creak of the door and managed to stop her. She looked at me with frightened eyes and yelled that I was a thief who had gotten into her house. The next day I signed the transfer papers for hospice care. It was a cozy place with friendly staff and a garden where patients could walk in nice weather. I came every day, sat by her side, held her hand, told her the news, even though I wasn't sure she understood me. Sometimes she had lucid moments. She recognized me, smiled, even remembered some episodes from our life. At such moments I saw the old Doreen, my Doreen, and my heart shrank with pain and tenderness. I called Roland and told him that his mother was now in hospice. "She doesn't have long to live, son," I said, struggling to get the words out. "Come on over. It would be important for her to see you." "Sure, Dad," he replied. "We'll definitely come this weekend." They didn't come this weekend or the next. Roland called with excuses. Then their car broke down. Then Addison had an important game at school. Then Caroline wasn't feeling well. The last time Doreen recognized me, she asked, "Did Roland come by?" "Yes," I lied. "He was here last night when you were asleep. He brought Addison. They said hello to you." She smiled and closed her eyes. She never regained consciousness again. The doctor said Doreen had a few weeks left, but I didn't want to believe it. Every morning I woke up at 5, made breakfast, which I hardly ate, and drove to the hospice to spend the day by her side. The hospice staff already knew me by name. Myra at the front desk would always offer me coffee. The orderly Jerome would shake my hand and ask me how my night was. "She's having a good day today, Mr. Parkhurst," Nurse Yvonne would say, greeting me in the hallway. Or, "It's been a restless night. She can be sleepy." I nodded and walked to her room, a bright room with a window overlooking the garden. Doreen was lying on the bed, surrounded by tubes and monitors, so fragile it seemed that one careless movement might break her. I sat down beside her, took her hand, dry, light as a bird's wing, and began to talk about what was happening in the world. "You know, Dory, the main street is finally being repaved today," I'd say. "The one they promised 5 years ago. Now it's blocked off and everybody's grumbling." She didn't answer, but sometimes I thought the corners of her lips lifted slightly in a smile. I'd bring her her favorite flowers, irises, read her favorite books aloud, told her old stories from our lives. The staff used to say that even if she didn't respond, she could hear me, and that gave her comfort. "Remember when we went on that vacation to Florida?" I asked, stroking her hand. "That motel with the neon sign and the noisy air conditioning. You said you'd never go on vacation again if I forgot to book a proper hotel again. And then we found that little restaurant with the best shrimp in the world, and you laughed and said it made up for everything else." At times like that, I felt like she could hear me. Sometimes her fingers would lightly squeeze my hand and I'd feel a lump go to my throat. Roland called once a week, always on Sundays, always between 2 and 3 in the afternoon, as if it were an item on his schedule. "Call my father." The calls were short and formal. "How's Mom?" he would ask. "No change," I'd answer. Or, "A little worse today. The doctors say it's to be expected." "I see," he'd say. "Hang in there, Dad." And then he'd go on to talk about his life, about his job, about the house they were renovating, about how Addison had won some school contest. He never said, "I'll be there," never asked if I needed help or support. I listened to his monologue and thought about how strange it was that the person I had known since my first breath had become such a stranger. One day, as I sat next to Doreen, Nurse Yvonne came into the room with the phone. "Mr. Parkhurst, your grandson's on the line. He says he can't reach you." I was surprised. Addison had never called me directly. I picked up the phone. "Grandpa?" Addison's voice sounded oddly formal. I wanted to know how Grandma was doing. "She's struggling," I answered, looking at Doreen's still face. "Thanks for calling, Eddie. She'd love to know what you think of her." "Yes, of course," he said. "Listen, I've been thinking, maybe you could lend me some money. There's a situation. I want to give Cheyenne a special present for her birthday next month. She's been wanting a new watch, a special watch for running." I sat in silence, interrupted only by the beeping of the monitors. My wife was dying, and my only grandson was calling to ask for money for a gift for his wife. Addison, I said finally, trying to keep my voice steady, now is not a good time for this conversation. Grandma is very sick. I understand, he said quickly. I just thought I'd call to see how she was doing. You know, kill two birds with one stone. Kill two birds with one stone. Interesting choice of words when one of those birds is his dying grandmother. I gotta go, Eddie, I said. I'll talk to you later. I hung up the phone and looked at Doreen. I thought her face looked even paler. It was Addison, I told her, taking her hand. He says hi. The next day, her condition worsened dramatically. The doctors were talking about her blood pressure dropping, heart problems. I sat next to her, holding her hand, feeling the life drain out of her with every breath. I called Roland. Son, your mom's not doing well. The doctors say it could be a matter of days, maybe even hours. You need to come over. Now. This time I heard something like real concern in his voice. We're on our way, he said. We'll be there in 3 hours. They arrived almost 5 hours later. Roland, Caroline, and Addison entered the room, dressed as if they were going to a business meeting rather than to a dying woman's bedside. Caroline held a bouquet, a standard one, obviously bought at the supermarket on the way in. Addison was staring at the phone, not looking up. Hi, Dad, Roland said, hugging me awkwardly. How is she? Unconscious for the last 24 hours, I answered. But the doctors say she can hear us. They spent less than an hour at Doreen's bedside. Roland tried to talk to her, to tell her stories from his childhood, but his voice sounded strained as if he were performing an unpleasant duty. Caroline was mostly silent, only occasionally glancing at her watch. Addison was still engrossed in his phone. We need to go, Caroline finally said. Addison had a big test at school tomorrow. I looked at my watch. It was only 5 in the evening. You can stay at my place, I suggested. There's plenty of room in the house. You'll be closer if… No, we'd better go, Roland answered quickly. But we'll be back tomorrow. They didn't come back tomorrow or the day after. Doreen died on the 3rd day after their visit, early in the morning, when the first rays of sunlight were just beginning to penetrate the window of the ward. I was holding her hand when the monitor showed a straight line and a long, shrill beep sounded. Nurses rushed into the room, but it was too late. I'm so sorry, Mr. Parkhurst, Dr. Eloise said, putting her hand on my shoulder. She left quietly, without pain. I nodded, unable to utter a word. 50 years together ended in that sterile room, to the beeping of medical instruments. This was not how I'd envisioned our goodbye. The next few hours passed like a blur. I signed some papers, talked to the hospice staff, to the funeral home staff. Everyone was kind and patient with me, but I felt stunned, like I was moving underwater. When I got home, the first thing I did was call Roland. Caroline answered the phone. Russell? She sounded surprised, as if she hadn't expected me to call. Roland's at work. Is something wrong? Doreen died this morning, I said. A pause. Oh, I'm so sorry, she said, and I could hear the awkwardness in her voice, not so much grief. I'll tell Roland as soon as he gets back. Tell him to call me, I said. We need to talk about the funeral. Of course, she said. He'll call. Roland called 3 hours later. His voice sounded upset, but in a superficial way, as if he were wearing a mask of grief, but underneath it was impatience. I'm sorry, Dad, he said. How are you? How can I be? I answered. Your mother is dead. Yes, of course, he said quickly. That's a silly question. What about the funeral? We discussed the details, date, time, place. Doreen wanted to be cremated, her ashes scattered over the lake where we often walked. Roland agreed with everything I suggested without making any suggestions of his own. We'll arrive the day before the ceremony, he said. We'll stay at a hotel. You can stay at my place, I suggested again. There's plenty of room in the house. No, I'd rather stay at the hotel, he said. It would be easier with Addison. You know, teenagers. I didn't argue. What did it matter where they stayed? What mattered was that they were coming to say goodbye to Doreen. After talking to Roland, I decided to call Addison. I felt it was important that he hear the news from me and not from his parents. Despite everything, he was Doreen's grandson and she loved him. Addison answered after the fifth ringtone. "Grandpa?" There was surprise in his voice. "What's wrong?" "Addison, I need to tell you something," I began, trying to keep my voice calm. "Grandma died this morning." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Oh," he finally said. "That's sad." "Yeah," I said. "The funeral will be next Wednesday. Your father said you'd be there." "Wednesday?" His voice suddenly changed. "This Wednesday?" "Yes, next Wednesday, the 16th. "Oh," he said again, and I heard a strange relief in his voice. "I can't Wednesday, Grandpa. It's Cheyenne's birthday and we've planned a big party. All the tickets are bought, the guests are invited." I sat there, clutching the phone so hard my fingers turned white. My grandson had just told me he preferred his wife's birthday to his grandmother's funeral. "Addison," I said, barely controlling my voice, "I'm talking about your grandmother's funeral. The woman who knitted you sweaters, baked you cookies, came to all your birthdays, even though you didn't always thank her for the gifts." "I understand, Grandpa," he replied, and I could hear the impatience in his voice. "But you don't understand. This is a big day for Cheyenne. We've been planning it for months. I can't just cancel it." "You can't cancel the party for your grandmother's funeral," I questioned, feeling a wave of anger rising inside. "Look, Grandma's already dead," he said with a cold logic that took my breath away. "She doesn't care if I go to the funeral or not, and Cheyenne would be very upset if I ruined her birthday." I was silent, unable to find the words. My own grandson, blood from Doreen's blood, spoke of her death with such indifference as if he were a stranger. "Addison," I finally said, "I hope you'll never know what it's like to have your family consider the holiday more important than saying goodbye to you." "Grandpa, don't be so dramatic," he snorted. "It's just a funeral. Grandma would have understood." "No, Eddie," I said quietly. "She wouldn't understand, and I don't understand." I hung up the phone, feeling something inside me snap. The last thread that connected me to this young man who bore the last name Parkhurst but was such a stranger. That night I couldn't sleep. Lying in my bed with Doreen, now so empty and cold, I thought about how everything had gone wrong. Where had I gone wrong? What could I have done differently? Was there a chance to change Roland, to influence Addison's upbringing? In the morning, I made a decision that Doreen probably wouldn't have approved of. She'd always been softer, always believed in the best in people. But Doreen was gone, and I needed to act on my own conscience. I pulled from my desk drawer the business card of Morris Wilkins, Doreen and I's attorney who had drafted our joint will 5 years ago, a will that left everything to our son and grandson. "Morris," I said when he picked up the phone, "I need to make some changes to the will. How soon can you see me?" The day of the funeral was unexpectedly sunny. I was expecting rain, gray skies, something to match my mood. But nature didn't seem to notice Doreen's departure. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and all of South Haven was flooded with warm spring light. I stood at the bedroom window, trying to tie my tie. My fingers wouldn't listen. Doreen had always helped me with it before. "Give it to me, Russ," she said with a smile. 69 years old and you still haven't learned how to tie a tie properly." And her nimble fingers made quick work of it. Today I had to do it myself. Finally, the tie was tied, not perfectly, a little crooked, but it didn't matter. I put on the jacket that Doreen and I had bought 5 years ago for our neighbor's wedding anniversary. "You look very elegant," Doreen said then, adjusting the lapels. "So handsome." Now the jacket hung on me like a hanger. I'd lost weight in the last few weeks, almost without noticing it. The ceremony was scheduled for 11 in the morning in the little chapel at the cemetery. Roland and Caroline had promised to be there by 10 so we could talk before the service. But at the beginning of 11, they were still gone. I checked my phone. No call, no message. Finally, at 10:45, there was the sound of a car pulling up. Their dark SUV pulled up in front of the house. Roland got out first, followed by Caroline. Addison wasn't with them, nor was his wife Cheyenne. "Sorry, Dad," Roland said as he entered the house. "Traffic on the highway." I didn't bother to tell him I'd checked the traffic online and there was no traffic. I didn't ask why they didn't leave sooner, knowing they might hit traffic. Didn't ask where Addison was. None of that mattered anymore. "We should get going," I said. "The service is in 15 minutes. We got in my car." I drove, Roland next to me, Caroline in the back. All the way to the cemetery we were silent. I could feel their gazes on the back of my neck, but I didn't want to start a conversation. The chapel was small, just a few rows of benches. When we arrived, people were already gathered there. Neighbors, some of Doreen's friends from her pottery group, nurses from the hospice. Myra and Yvonne had come on their day off to say goodbye to a patient they had only known for a few months, and her own grandson preferred his wife's birthday. The service was short and simple, just as Doreen had wanted. The priest spoke of her kindness, her creativity, her love of family. At those words, I felt Roland beside me tense up. After the service, we all headed to the lake where I was to scatter Doreen's ashes. She loved this place. We often walked here, sitting on a bench, watching the ducks and swans. "When my time comes," she used to say, "let me go here, Russ. Let me be part of this lake, these trees, this sky." I stood on the shore, holding the urn with the ashes of the woman I'd lived with for half a century. The sun reflected in the water. A light breeze rustled the leaves. I opened the urn and slowly scattered the ashes over the water. It swirled in the air, silvery gray in the sunlight, before sinking to the smooth surface of the lake. "Goodbye, Dory," I whispered. "Love you." The people around me were silent. Only someone sobbed softly. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Roland. His face was pale, his eyes dry. "Dad," he said, "that was beautiful." I nodded, not trusting my voice. After the ceremony, everyone gathered at our house. My neighbor Martha had organized a small buffet. Sandwiches, salads, cake. People came up to me, offering condolences, sharing memories of Doreen. I nodded, thanked, answered questions, but felt like I was behind glass, separated from everything that was going on. Roland and Caroline kept to themselves, talking mostly to each other. I noticed Caroline looking around, studying the room as if assessing the surroundings. When the last of the guests left, the three of us remained in the living room. There was an awkward silence. "So," Roland began, clearing his throat, "how are you, Dad? Are you doing okay?" "How can you cope 3 days after your wife's death?" I answered. "Yes, of course," he said quickly. "That's a stupid question. I just wanted to say, if you need help—" "With what?" I asked. "What exactly do you want to help me with, Roland?" He looked confused. "You know, with paperwork, organizational issues, the whole, inheritance stuff. That's it. I've been waiting for it to come up." "There's nothing wrong with the inheritance," I said calmly. "Don't worry about it." "I'm not worried about it," he replied quickly. "It's just, Caroline and I could help you with the paperwork, the bank, all of it, so you don't have to deal with it at such a difficult time." Caroline nodded, feigning sympathy. "We just want you to know that we're here for you, Russell," she said. "Whatever you need, whatever I need." I almost laughed. Where were they when I really needed help? When I was caring for Doreen, when I was sitting with her in hospice, when I was trying to deal with my own grief. "Thank you," I said, "but I've got Morris. He'll help with the paperwork." "Morris?" Roland interjected. "That old lawyer?" Yes, our lawyer, I confirmed. He's been handling our cases for years. But Dad, Roland stepped forward. Morris, he's not young anymore. Are you sure he can handle all these modern procedures? Maybe we should go to someone a little more relevant? Someone like Caroline's lawyer? I asked bluntly. Roland looked confused. Well, Harvey really is an excellent specialist in probate law. Morris is doing a fine job, I interrupted him. Don't worry about it. There was an awkward pause. Caroline looked at her watch. Roland, we have to leave if we want to get home before midnight. Are you leaving tonight? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Yes, Dad, Roland answered. Caroline has an important meeting tomorrow and Eddie has school. You understand? I nodded. Of course I understood. Work, school, their lives, all of that had always been more important than me and Doreen. Speaking of Addison, I said, why isn't he here? Roland and Caroline exchanged glances. It's Cheyenne's birthday today, Roland answered cautiously. She and her friends had planned a trip. All the tickets had already been bought, deposits made. It would be hard to cancel. Harder than missing your own grandmother's funeral? I asked. Dad, you know how it is with young people, Roland sighed. A birthday is a big deal to them, more important than the death of a family member. He wanted to come, Caroline interjected, but Cheyenne would be very upset. They're newlyweds, they need to keep in touch. I looked at them and didn't recognize them. They were my son and his wife, but they sounded like strangers with values that were alien to me. I see, I said at last. Well, I won't keep you. You have important business to attend to. They left 20 minutes later, promising to call and see me. I stood on the doorstep, watching their car disappear around the corner, and I knew I wouldn't see them again anytime soon. Back in the house, I sat in Doreen's chair and took a long look at the pictures on the mantelpiece. Our wedding, Roland's birth, the first day of school, graduation. Happy moments that now seemed to belong to another life, another family. The next day, I called Morris Wilkins and made an appointment. He offered to come to my house, knowing it would be hard for me to leave the house so soon after the funeral. Morris showed up at the appointed time, a tall, thin man with a mop of gray hair and kind eyes behind thick glasses. We'd known him for years. He was not only our lawyer, but a friend. Russell, he said, shaking my hand firmly. My deepest condolences. Doreen was a wonderful woman. Thank you, Morris, I said. Come, sit down. We were seated in the living room. I offered him coffee, which he accepted gratefully. So, he began as we settled in, you wanted to discuss the changes in the will. Yes, I replied. Significant changes. I told him about my decision, how Addison had chosen his wife's birthday over his grandmother's funeral, how Roland and Caroline seemed more interested in the inheritance than in Doreen's memory, about how for years they'd neglected us, showing up only when they needed something. Morris listened attentively, not interrupting. When I finished, he sat silent for a while, then said, Are you sure, Russell? It's a big decision. I've never been so sure in my life, I replied. I want them out of the will completely. All three of them, Roland, Addison, and just in case, Caroline, though I don't think she'd qualify. Technically, she wouldn't, Morris confirmed. But who do you want to appoint as heir in their place? I've already thought of that. St. Elizabeth's Hospice, I said. They've been taking care of Doreen these last months, done more for her than her own family. I want everything, the house, the savings, the insurance, all to go to them. Morris nodded. That's possible, of course, but you must realize that Roland can contest the will. As an only child, he has certain rights. Let him try, I said firmly. Do you have proof of their neglect? Phone records, testimony from the hospice staff about how rarely they visited Doreen. There are ways to corroborate all that, Morris replied cautiously. But I have to ask you again, Russell. Are you sure you want to go down this road? It could lead to a long legal battle that would only add to your pain. I looked at Doreen's picture on the mantelpiece. She was smiling, holding a clay vase she'd just created. Her first piece of work that she was so proud of. "I'm sure," I replied. "Doreen might have been against it. She always believed in the best in people. But I've seen their true faces, Morris. I don't want them to get anything from us after neglecting us for so long." Morris nodded and pulled a file folder out of his briefcase. "I've prepared a draft of a new will based on our phone conversation," he said. "Let's go through it. Make sure it's in line with your wishes." We spent the next hour discussing the details. What exactly was included in the inheritance? How it would be transferred to the hospice? What terms should be spelled out to minimize the chances of a successful challenge? "There's one more thing," I said when we were done with the main points. "I want you to send a formal letter to Addison. I want him to know that he's excluded from the will and why." Morris raised his eyebrows. "This is unusual, Russell. Usually the contents of a will remain confidential until the time of execution." "I know," I replied. "But in this case, I want him to know. I want him to understand the consequences of his choices." Morris studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Good. I can draw up a formal notice. But think again, Russell. Such a move could sever your relationship with your grandson forever." "What relationship, Morris?" I chuckled bitterly. "It's gone. He chose his wife's birthday over his grandmother's funeral. What does that say about our relationship?" Morris didn't argue. "What exactly do you want to tell him in the letter?" "I've already thought it through. I want him to know that he's excluded from the will because of his disregard for his family, for choosing a holiday over a funeral. I want the letter to be dry, official, no emotion, just the facts. Let him know it was a conscious decision, not an impulsive act in a moment of grief." Morris took notes. "I'll draft the letter and send it to you for approval before I send it to Addison," he said. "What about Roland? Do you want him to get that notice too?" I wondered. Roland had at least come to the funeral, though his motives were questionable. "No," I decided. "Let him find out from Addison or when it's time to execute the will. I don't want to give him time to prepare to contest it." Morris nodded. "Reasonable from a legal point of view. I'll prepare all the necessary documents. In a couple of days we can officially sign the new will." When Morris left, I sat down in Doreen's chair again. The house seemed empty and quiet without her. I picked up her photograph and stared at the familiar features for a long time. "I know you wouldn't approve, Dory," I whispered. "You always believed that Roland would come to his senses, that Addison was just going through a difficult age. But I can't pretend anymore. They've shown who they really are, and I have to act accordingly." 3 days later, I met with Morris again at his office where I officially signed the new will. The document was concise and clear. The entire estate goes to St. Elizabeth Hospice. No conditions, no reservations. Complete exclusion of Roland and Addison as heirs. Morris also showed me a draft letter for Addison. It was exactly as I wanted it, dry, formal, unemotional. "You are hereby notified that Russell James Parkhurst, your grandfather, has amended his will, dated May 15th of this year, to exclude you entirely from the line of succession. This decision is made as a result of your systematic neglect of family responsibilities, culminating in your refusal to attend the funeral of your grandmother, Doreen Elizabeth Parkhurst, in favor of celebrating your spouse's birthday. The decision is final and effective immediately." "Is that what you wanted?" Morris asked. "Yes," I replied. "That's exactly what I wanted. When will he receive this letter?" "I'll send it tomorrow morning by courier with return receipt. He should receive it in 2 or 3 days." I nodded. 3 days. 3 days from now, Addison will know that his decision to choose his wife's birthday over his grandmother's funeral cost him his inheritance, that his indifference to his family has consequences. "Thank you, Morris," I said, shaking the lawyer's hand, "for everything." "You're welcome, Russell," he replied. I hope this decision brings you some peace of mind." As I left Morris's office, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was as if the weight I'd been carrying for years had lessened a little. I knew there was still a lot of pain ahead. I still missed Doreen every minute, still woke up at night looking for her beside me. But now I at least had a sense that justice would be served, that callousness and neglect would not go unpunished. I returned home and sat on the porch, looking out at the setting sun. The spring evening was warm and quiet. A dog was barking somewhere in the distance, and the cries of seagulls came from the lake. "What would you say now, Dory?" I thought. She had always been the voice of reason and compassion in our couple, always saw the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. But even Doreen, with her boundless kindness, was frustrated with her son and grandson's behavior in recent years. I saw it in her eyes, heard it in her voice when she talked about them. "I've done what I think is right, Dory," I whispered into the evening air. "I hope you'll understand." The first phone call rang on Thursday night, 4 days after the letter was sent. I was watching an old Western on TV, not really paying attention to the story when the phone rang loudly. Addison's number popped up on the screen. I stared at the flashing display, feeling my heart pounding somewhere in my throat. Part of me wanted to answer, to hear what he had to say. The other part, the part that still ached from his words about Doreen's funeral, wanted nothing to do with him. The phone kept ringing. After the 6th ringtone, the answering machine came on. "Grandfather?" Addison's voice sounded unaccustomedly uncertain. "It's me, Eddie. I got a letter from your lawyer. I think we need to talk. Please call me back when you can." I sat motionless, staring at the answering machine. No apology, no admission of guilt. Just, "We need to talk." The phone rang again 20 minutes later. This time it was Roland. "Dad?" His voice was strained. "Are you home? Addison tried to call you. He got some weird letter from Morris. What's going on?" I didn't return that call either. I wasn't ready for this conversation. I wasn't sure I ever would be. The next day, the calls continued. Roland, Addison, even Caroline tried to contact me. I turned off the house phone and put my cell phone on silent mode. I needed time to think, to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. On Saturday morning, I heard a knock on the door. Looking out the window, I saw a familiar SUV parked outside the house. Roland, Caroline, and Addison were standing on the porch. Addison was holding an envelope, a letter from Morris. I took a deep breath and went to open the door. "Dad," Roland started as soon as I opened it. "What's going on? We haven't been able to reach you for 2 days." "Come in," I said, stepping aside. There was no point in discussing this on the doorstep. They walked into the living room, wary, like people entering a stranger's house. Caroline sat down on the couch. Roland remained standing. Addison shifted awkwardly from foot to foot, holding the envelope in front of him like a shield. "I got this," he said, holding out the letter. "Is this some kind of joke?" I looked at him, really looking at his face for the first time in a long time. 23 years old, almost a grown man, but at that moment he looked like a confused boy. For a second, I felt a prick of regret. Then I remembered his words. "Grandma's already dead, she doesn't care." "No, Addison," I said calmly. "It's not a joke." "But why?" Roland intervened. "What's going on, Dad? Why did you suddenly decide to change the will?" I looked at my son. His face expressed genuine bewilderment, as if he really didn't understand the reasons for my decision. "Suddenly?" I asked him again. "Nothing sudden, Roland. This decision was the result of years of neglect on your part. Years of thinking of Mom and me only when you needed something." "That's not fair," Roland objected. "We have our own lives, our own worries. We can't be around each other all the time." "I didn't ask to be around all the time," I said. "I asked for basic respect and attention, for you to visit your mother when she was dying. For your son," I looked at Addison, to come to his grandmother's funeral instead of celebrating his wife's birthday. Addison lowered his eyes. I couldn't cancel, he muttered. It was already planned. Yeah, you already explained that, I said. Grandma's already dead, she doesn't care. Remember those words? There was a heavy silence in the room. Roland looked from me to his son. Eddie, did you really say that? He finally asked. Addison shrugged, not looking up. I didn't mean it, he mumbled. That's exactly what you meant, I interrupted. And you know what? You're right. Doreen doesn't care anymore, but I do care. So I figured if you all didn't care when she was alive, you wouldn't care what happens to her inheritance. But it's our inheritance, Caroline suddenly intervened. Roland is your only son. It's family property. I gave her a long look. Family, I repeated. And what is family, Caroline? It's people who are there for each other in times of need. Those who support each other. Where were you all when Doreen was struggling with Alzheimer's? Where were you when I sat with her in hospice, day after day, watching her fade away? We had a life, Roland repeated stubbornly. Work, commitments. And I had a wife, I replied. Your mother, who needed her family, who asked about you every day even when she could hardly remember her own name. I saw Roland lower his eyes. For the first time in a long time, something like shame flashed across his face. Look, Grandpa, Addison interjected, suddenly regaining his voice. I understand that you're upset. We're all upset about Grandma's death. But this is too much. To disinherit us because of one mistake? One mistake? I questioned. Do you really think it's about one mistake? I stood up and walked over to the bookcase where our photo albums were kept. I pulled out one of them, the one with the dates of the last 5 years. Here, I said, opening the album. Doreen's 70th birthday. Do you remember that day, Addison? No? No wonder, because you weren't there. Not you, not your parents. You were all too busy. Here's Thanksgiving 3 years ago. Doreen and me at the table, alone. You promised to come, but you canceled at the last minute. Here's Christmas. Same thing. And here, I flipped a few pages, is the beginning of her illness. Do you know how many times you visited her in the first year after her diagnosis? 3 times. 3 visits in an entire year. I slammed the album shut. So, no, Addison, this isn't about one mistake. It's about years of neglect, years of you all showing me and Doreen weren't important to you. I simply drew the appropriate conclusions. A silence ensued. Addison looked stunned. Roland looked ashamed. Caroline was the only one who kept her composure. All right, Russell, she said at last. We see your point. We recognize that we may not have been paying enough attention to you, but we're here now. We want to make things right. Fix it? I interjected. Or get an inheritance. Dad, that's not fair, Roland interjected. We're not here for the money. Then why are you here? I asked bluntly. Why are you suddenly so interested in talking to me? Why didn't you come right after the funeral when I was alone and needed support? He couldn't find an answer. I saw Caroline give him an annoyed look. We're here because you're our family, she said firmly, and we want to be there for you during this difficult time. Like you were there for Doreen? I asked. Like you've been there for me all these years? People change, Addison said suddenly. People make mistakes and learn from them. Give us a chance to show that we can be better. I looked at my grandson. There was sincerity in his eyes, or a very good imitation of it. For a moment, I felt doubt. Maybe they had really realized their mistakes. Maybe Doreen's death had been as much a revelation to them as it had been to me. But then I remembered that they were not here because they had realized their guilt. They're here because they got a letter from a lawyer, because they found out they were losing their inheritance. I'm glad you all realize the importance of family, I finally said, but my decision still stands. The estate will go to St. Elizabeth's Hospice. Hospice? Caroline exclaimed. You're leaving everything to strangers instead of your own family. Strangers who cared for Doreen in her last days, I replied. Who sat with her, talked to her, held her hand when her own family was too busy. That's absurd, Caroline said, losing her composure. Roland, say something. He can't just disinherit us. Roland looked confused, torn between his wife and his father. Dad, he began uncertainly, I know you're upset. We're all upset. But this is too drastic a solution. Maybe we could find a compromise. What kind of compromise, Roland? I asked. I'll give you half and you pretend to be a loving family. Or a quarter. How much is your love worth? Roland looked as if I'd hit him. It's not about money, he said. It's about principle. We're your family. Family isn't just blood ties, I replied. Family is about actions, caring, support. You've all proven yourselves incapable of that. But people change, Addison repeated. Give us a chance to prove we can be better. I looked at my grandson. In a different situation, maybe I would have believed him. Maybe I would have given him that chance. But now, seeing the way his parents were tensely watching me, the way Caroline was already calculating how much they stood to lose, I couldn't believe the sincerity of his words. People do change, Addison, I said. But not usually when money is involved. You're not all here because you realized your mistakes. You're here because you found out you're losing your inheritance. It's not fair, Caroline said again. We can contest the will. Roland is your only son. He has rights. You can try, I replied calmly. Morris has taken all the legal aspects into account. The will is written in such a way that it would be very difficult to contest it. But even if you succeed, you'll get far less than you could, and you'll spend most of it on legal fees. I saw Caroline go pale. She was smart enough to realize I was right. One more thing, I added. If you decide to contest the will, I'll turn over to the court all the evidence of your neglect, all the pictures of family gatherings where you're not present, all phone records of phone calls where you refuse to show up, all testimony from hospice staff about how rarely you visited Doreen. Are you sure you want all this to go public? Roland and Caroline exchanged glances. I could see the confidence leaving them. Dad, Roland said at last, I understand that you're upset. I understand that we weren't the perfect family. But this is too much. You can't just cut us out of your life. I'm not cutting you out of my life, Roland, I replied. I'm just not giving you something you don't deserve. If you really want to be a part of my life, if you really want to show that you can be better, then don't do it for the inheritance. Do it because I'm your father and grandfather, because you love me, because you care. There was silence. I could see them looking at each other, not knowing what to say. Finally, Caroline stood up. I think we need time to think about this, she said. This is unexpected turn. I nodded. Take all the time you need. I'm in no hurry. They left shortly afterward, promising to call. I stood on the porch watching their car disappear around the corner, just like after Doreen's funeral. Only this time I didn't feel bitterness or loneliness. I felt a strange calm, as if I'd fulfilled the promise I'd made to Doreen, to protect what was dear to us from those who didn't appreciate it. Back in the house, I sat in Doreen's chair and closed my eyes. What would she say about my decision? Would she approve of it? Or would she ask me to be gentler, to give them another chance? Doreen had always seen the best in people. Even when Roland started to drift away from us as a teenager, she'd say, "Give him time, Russ. All boys go through that." Even when he married Caroline and it became clear that they would rarely visit us, she would say, "They have their own lives, their own worries." Even when Addison grew cold and aloof, she would say, "He's still young. He'll change." But was this optimism or self-deception? Did she see the truth, but refuse to admit it because it hurt too much? Or did she really believe that one day they would change, be better? I didn't know the answer to these questions, but I did know that Doreen loved our family more than anything. She deserved better than indifference from her own son and grandson. She deserved respect and remembrance. The next day, Roland called again. His voice sounded strained but polite. "Dad, I've been thinking about what you said. You're right. We weren't a good family for you and Mom. We were too busy doing our own thing selfish." I listened in silence, not interrupting. "I want to fix that," he continued. "Not for the inheritance, but because you're my father. I was thinking, maybe I could come visit you every weekend, help out around the house, just, spend time together?" I felt a twinge inside. Was he sincere? Or was he just trying to win back the favor, and with it, the inheritance? "You can come whenever you want, Roland," I said at last. "The door is always open to you. But my decision about the will still stands." There was a pause at the other end of the line. "I understand," he said at last. "And I respect your decision. This isn't about money, Dad. It's about fixing our relationship before it's too late." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But years of neglect have taught me caution. "Time will tell, Roland," I said. "Time will tell." After that conversation, there was a lull. Neither Roland, Addison, nor Caroline called or came. I didn't know what they were discussing among themselves, what plans they were making. But I was prepared for the possibility that they might attempt to contest the will or find some other way to get back what they thought was rightfully theirs. A week later, I got a call from Morris. "Russell," he said, "I got an interesting call from an attorney named Harvey Greenberg. He's representing your son and asked about the possibility of contesting the new will." I felt my heart clench. So it was money after all. All their remorse, all their promises to reform, it was all for the inheritance. "What did you tell him?" I asked him. "What I told you," Morris replied. "That the will was legally flawless, and that trying to contest it would result in a long and expensive trial with little chance of success." And he said he would pass that information on to his client. "I don't think they're going to sue, Russell. That would be irrational on their part." I nodded, though Morris couldn't see it through the phone. "Thank you, Morris. You're welcome. And, Russell, how are you?" I pondered the question. How am I doing? The grief for Doreen was still fresh, a wound that wouldn't heal for a long time. But the betrayal of the family. In a strange way, the decision to change my will brought some relief. It was as if I'd finally stopped pretending everything was all right, stopped ignoring the obvious. "I'm doing fine," I replied. "Day by day." "Good," Morris said. "Let me know if you need anything else." After talking to Morris, I sat on the porch for a long time looking outside. Neighborhood kids were playing on the lawn, their laughter echoing throughout the neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson was walking her terrier. Life went on, despite all the losses and disappointments. I thought of Doreen, of what she would say now. Perhaps she would ask me to be gentler, to give Roland and Addison another chance. But maybe she would understand my decision, see the truth I finally dared to admit. Our family hadn't been a family for a long time. "I miss you, Dory," I whispered into the evening air. "I miss you every day." The phone in my pocket vibrated. A message from Addison. "Grandpa, I want to apologize for not coming to Grandma's funeral. It was wrong. I was selfish and didn't think about your feelings. I would like to meet and talk in person. Please let me know when it's convenient for you." I stared at the screen, feeling conflicting emotions struggling inside. Part of me wanted to believe that Addison had truly realized his mistake, that he was truly sorry. The other part reminded me that this message had only come after he'd learned he'd been disinherited. I didn't respond right away. I needed time to think about my response, to decide if I was willing to give him another chance. That evening, I called St. Elizabeth Hospice and asked if they needed volunteers. The woman on the other end of the line, who introduced herself as Susan, the volunteer coordinator, was delighted with my call. "We are always in need of help, Mr. Parkhurst," she said, "especially people with life experience who can just sit with patients, talk to them." I thought about the days I'd spent with Doreen, how important it was to her just to have me there, the sound of my voice. I could do that, I said. When do I start? We're having an orientation meeting for new volunteers this Wednesday, Susan answered. 10 o'clock in the morning. Would you be able to come? Yes, I said. I'll be there. After that conversation, I felt strangely relieved, as if I had found a new purpose, a new meaning. Maybe I couldn't protect Doreen from illness, couldn't make our family appreciate her while she was alive, but I could do something for other people going through the same things we went through. That night, I couldn't sleep again. Lying in our bed, so empty without Doreen, I thought about what she would say about my decision to volunteer at the hospice. I could almost hear her voice. That's good, Russ. Use your pain to help others. That's what makes us human. What would she say about my decision not to respond to Addison's message? I wasn't sure. Doreen had always believed in forgiveness, in second chances. But even she would have had a hard time forgiving the way our family had treated us in recent years. Perhaps she would advise me to be cautious, but open. To listen to Addison, to understand his motives, but not to let him manipulate me. To be firm but fair. The next day, I did respond to Addison's message. You can come over Saturday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We'll talk. His reply came almost instantly. Thanks, Grandpa. I'll be there. I didn't know what to expect from this meeting. I didn't know if Addison would be sincere or if it would be another attempt to get his inheritance back. But I was willing to listen to him, to give him a chance to explain himself. Not for his sake, but for Doreen, who always believed in the best in people, even when reality proved otherwise. Spring passed imperceptibly into summer and summer into fall. The leaves on the trees turned gold and purple and then fell, carpeting the walkways of St. Elizabeth's Hospice with a soft carpet. I went there 3 times a week, usually in the morning when patients were more awake and needed company. It had been 5 months since that Wednesday orientation meeting. At that time, I sat in the hospice conference room among other new volunteers, a young medical school student, a middle-aged couple who had lost a daughter to cancer, and an older woman whose husband had died here the previous year. We were all here for different reasons, but we were united by a desire to be helpful, to turn our own pain into helping others. Susan, the volunteer coordinator, explained the rules and responsibilities to us. The most important thing you can give our patients is your time and attention, she said. Many of them are lonely. Some don't have family or friends who can visit them regularly. Your presence, even if you just sit next to them and hold their hand, means a lot to them. I remembered sitting next to Doreen for hours, day after day, holding her hand, telling her the news, reading books. I knew how important it was to her, even when she could no longer respond. I was assigned 2 patients, Harold, a 70-year-old former history teacher with terminal pancreatic cancer, and Eleanor, an 85-year-old widow with dementia who reminded me of Doreen. I spent 2 hours with each of them, talking, reading aloud, sometimes just sitting next to them in comfortable silence. Harold liked to talk about history, about his travels as a young man, about the books he was reading. Eleanor often confused me with her late husband, but it seemed to bring her comfort, so I didn't correct her. Sometimes she would have moments of clarity, and then she would talk about her children and grandchildren living in other states, too busy to visit her regularly. I couldn't help but see the parallels to my own situation. During those months, hospice became a second home to me. I knew all the nurses, orderlies, other volunteers by name. We exchanged news, shared patient stories, and supported each other. It was a community united by a common goal, to make the last days of the dying as comfortable and dignified as possible. Harold died 2 months after I started visiting him. It was peaceful. He just didn't wake up one morning. At his funeral, I met his son who came from out of state. "Thank you for being with him," he said, shaking my hand. "He mentioned you in our phone conversations, said you reminded him of an old friend from college." I nodded, not trusting my voice. I was sad to say goodbye to Harold, but I was glad I could brighten his last days. After Harold, I was assigned a new patient, Lawrence, a 65-year-old former truck driver with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. He could no longer speak, but he communicated by using a special board with letters that he pointed to with his eyes. Despite his physical limitations, Lawrence maintained a sharp mind and sense of humor. He loved it when I told him about my volunteer work, about other patients, about what was going on in the world. At home, I didn't sit idle either. I started tidying up the garden that Doreen used to do. I planted her favorite irises and roses, trimmed the hedges, repaired the bench under the old oak tree. Working in the garden gave me time to think, to remember, to come to terms with my loss. I also sorted through Doreen's things, slowly, gradually, giving myself time for each item. Her clothes I gave to the thrift store at the church, except for a few special items I kept as a memento. Her favorite sweater, the scarf she wore on special days. Her pottery collection I partly kept and partly gave to her friends at the pottery studio. Addison came to our meeting on Saturday as we had agreed. He looked nervous, unsure, not at all like the cocky young man who had so carelessly declined to attend his grandmother's funeral. "Thanks for agreeing to meet, Grandpa," he said, sitting across from me in the living room. I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "Yeah, I wanted to apologize," he began, stammering, "for everything, for not coming to my grandmother's funeral, for not visiting you more often when she was sick, for being so selfish." I stared at him, trying to see the sincerity in his words. Was it genuine remorse or just an attempt to get his inheritance back? "Why now, Addison?" I asked bluntly. "Why not before, when Grandma was alive and needed you?" He lowered his eyes. "I don't know," he answered quietly. "I was busy with my life. Cheyenne, work, friends. Everything seemed so important. And then, when I got the letter from your lawyer, it was like a slap in the face. Like someone finally made me see the person I was." I remained silent, giving him a chance to continue. "I'm not asking you to put me back in the will," he said, raising his eyes. I want to try to fix what can still be fixed. Our relationship. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But there had been too many years of neglect, too many empty promises." "Time will tell, Addison," I said finally. "Words are easy to say. Actions are what matter." He nodded, accepting my answer. "I understand, and I'll prove to you that I really have changed." After that conversation, Addison started calling once a week, usually on Sundays. The calls were short, awkward. He talked about his work, about Cheyenne, asked how I was doing. I answered politely but discreetly, not allowing myself to get too attached to this new version of my grandson. Roland, too, was trying to establish a relationship. He came twice. Once to offer to help repair the roof, I politely declined, saying I'd already hired specialists. The second time, just for lunch. We sat at the table, exchanging news, carefully avoiding the subject of the will. It was strange, like we were playing the roles of father and son without really being father and son. Caroline never showed up or called again, which didn't surprise me. She'd always been the most pragmatic of them all, and if there was no chance of getting the inheritance back, she saw no point in wasting time with me. Life was slowly falling into a new direction. The loss of Doreen still felt like a physical pain, especially in the mornings when I woke up alone in our bed, or in the evenings when I habitually turned around to share a thought with her and found a void. But each day got a little easier. Working at the hospice gave me purpose, a sense that I was doing something important that Doreen would approve of. I also made new friends. Richard, another hospice volunteer who lost his wife 2 years ago, became my regular companion for chess games. Margaret, a nurse, often invited me to dinner at her home, where her husband Fred cooked delicious steaks. Susan, the volunteer coordinator, turned out to be an avid jazz lover like me, and we often exchanged CDs and discussed concerts. It wasn't family in the traditional sense, but these were people who really cared about me, who were there for me not because of obligation or inheritance, but because they cared. One cold November morning, as I was getting ready for hospice care, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, I saw a delivery man with an envelope. "Mr. Parkhurst?" he asked. "Express delivery for you." I signed the receipt and took the envelope. The sender was listed as Addison. Strange, I thought. He usually just calls. When I opened the envelope, I found a letter written in hurried handwriting. "Grandpa, I'm writing to you because we have a difficult situation. Cheyenne has been diagnosed with heart problems and needs surgery. Our insurance only covers part of the cost, and we urgently need money for the remaining $30,000. I know our relationship has been difficult, and I understand your decision about the will. But this is Cheyenne's life we're talking about here. Please consider helping us. We'll get the money back as soon as we can. Hopefully, Addison." I sat holding the letter in my hands and felt a wave of frustration rising inside. All these calls, all these attempts at a relationship, it was all just preparation for asking for money. Not for forgiveness, not for a real relationship, but for money. I remembered the day Addison had called to inquire about Doreen's condition and then asked for money for a gift for Cheyenne. Some things never change. I folded the letter back into the envelope, sealed it, and wrote "Return to sender" on the front. Then I called the same courier service and ordered return delivery. When the courier drove away with the unopened letter, I felt a strange calm. It was a final breakup, a recognition that some relationships cannot be fixed, that some people will never change. I felt no anger or bitterness, only a calm acceptance of a reality I had long refused to see. At the hospice, that day was particularly eventful. Eleanor was restless, not recognizing me, calling for her husband. I sat beside her, holding her hand, telling stories of times I never knew, but which seemed to soothe her. Lawrence was in a good mood, talkative. He made a whole list of books for me that he wanted me to bring him next time. After lunch, I went into the office of the hospice director, Dr. Henderson. We were discussing the possibility of expanding the volunteer program, getting more people to help patients. "You know, Russell," Dr. Henderson said, looking at me over his glasses, "you've become an integral part of our team. Patients are always asking about you, looking forward to your visits." I nodded, feeling warmed by his words. "This hospice means a lot to me," I replied. "I feel needed here, useful." "You make a big difference in the lives of our patients," he said. "And if I may make a personal remark, I think Doreen would be very proud of you." I felt tears come to my eyes. Yes, Doreen would be proud. She had always believed in helping others, that even in the darkest times you can find light by helping those who are worse off than you. That evening back home, I sat in Doreen's chair as I often did when I wanted to feel her presence. The phone rang. It was Addison. I didn't answer, letting the call go to the answering machine. "Grandpa," his voice sounded strained, "I got the envelope you returned. I understand. I understand that you're disappointed in me. But this is about Cheyenne, about her health. Please call me back." I didn't. Instead, I wrote a short letter. "Addison, I am sorry for Cheyenne's health issues and hope she gets better. However, I cannot help you financially, not because I don't want to help a person in need, but because I don't believe it would change our relationship. All those months of calling and trying to mend the relationship were just preparation for asking for money. It shows that nothing has changed. I wish you both the best, but our paths have parted. Russell." I sent the letter by regular mail and never revisited the subject again. Addison called a few more times, but I didn't answer. Roland called too, trying to convince me to help the family in their time of need. I was polite but firm. My decision was final. As time went on, the calls became less frequent and then stopped altogether. I knew they had found another way to get the money, perhaps a loan from the bank, perhaps help from Cheyenne's parents. It was no longer my concern. The winter that year was snowy and cold. I often remembered how Doreen and I used to sit by the fireplace on such evenings, drinking hot chocolate, talking about the past and the future. Now I sat alone, but I didn't feel lonely. I had my hospice work, my new friends, my memories of Doreen. One evening on my way back from hospice, I noticed a light in the windows of the house across the street, which had stood empty for a long time. New neighbors? I decided to stop by to say hello, as is the custom in South Haven. The door was opened by a woman about my age, with kind eyes and gray hair in a neat bundle. "Hello," I said. "I'm Russell Parkhurst. I live across the street. I wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood." "Nice to meet you," she smiled. "I'm Helen Coleman. I just moved from Portland to be closer to my daughter. She lives 3 blocks from here. We got to talking. Helen was a widow like me, lost her husband 3 years ago. She was a retired elementary school teacher who loved gardening and classic literature. I invited her to tea the next day, and she agreed. That's how another person came into my life who became important to me. Helen and I were not romantically involved. We both missed our departed spouses too much for that. But we became good friends, often taking walks together, going to movies, exchanging books. Sometimes she would come with me to the hospice and read to patients. She had a lovely, expressive voice, the result of years of working with children. In April, almost a year after Doreen's death, I received a postcard from Roland, the first message in months. He wrote that Cheyenne had had successful surgery, they'd found money through some medical fund, that Addison had gotten a promotion at work, that they were thinking about moving to another state. It ended with a short, "We miss you, Dad." I didn't respond to the card, not because I was angry or hurt, but because I no longer felt the need to maintain this formal, empty relationship. I had a new life, new people who really cared about me, not because of obligations or inheritance. In May, on the anniversary of Doreen's death, I organized a small ceremony at the lake where her ashes were scattered. My friends from hospice, Helen, a few neighbors who knew and loved Doreen came. We talked about her, remembered stories, laughed and cried. It wasn't goodbye, I said goodbye to her a year ago, but a celebration of her life, her kindness, her love. Standing by the lake, looking at the sunset reflecting in the water, I thought about how my life had changed over the year. I had lost the wife I had lived with for 50 years. I had lost illusions about my family, the son and grandson I thought I knew. But I also found new purpose, new friends, new meaning. Doreen always said that true family is not necessarily those to whom you are related by blood, but those who are there for you in times of need, who support you, who truly care about you. A year ago, I didn't truly understand that. Now I did. Looking at the people gathered around me, Richard with his chess stories, Margaret with her caring smile, Susan with her love of jazz, Helen with her kind eyes, I knew I had found my true family. Not the one given by birth, but the one chosen by the heart. "To Doreen," I said, raising my glass of her favorite wine. "To Doreen," everyone around me said. I smiled, feeling a warm breeze touch my face, like Doreen's light touch, like she was telling me, "It's okay, Russ, you found your way." And I knew it was true. I had found my way, my new meaning, my new family. Not the one I dreamed of when I was a young father holding my newborn Roland in my arms. Not the one I thought of when I first saw Addison. But a real, genuine one, built on caring and mutual respect. Life went on, and there was still a lot of good, a lot of light, a lot of love. Not the same as before, but beautiful in its own way.